we're going to talk about what you as executives and leaders for your organization need to do. So the first thing we're going to start with is looking at what CMMC is. We get that it's a technical implementation. A lot of folks think that this is an IT project, but I'm here to say that actually only a third of it is technical in nature. And really, there are a lot of other types of changes that need to go into this. So what are they? And we're going to look at the different types of changes that go within an organization. And when we look, there's actually 9 different types of changes. But how many of these actually apply to a CMMC project? When we look at it, it's strategic. So starting with a strategic initiative, investing, even if you're a small organization, we're talking $250,000 investment from start to end in hard dollars. That doesn't count soft dollars that you're investing with your time and your resources within your organization. So it's definitely a strategic initiative. When we look at structural changes, one of the very first things that you need to do is stand up a GRC, a Governance Risk Compliance Committee. So now you've got a whole new structure that you have to do. That doesn't count if you're adding a new staff, if you're elevating IT, other types of changes in the organization. We agree that there are security components to this from top to bottom. And so you're going to have technological changes. If you're doing this implementation project and you're not impacting the folks on the floor that are doing production, then you're not doing this right. This is going to impact your organization. One of the biggest mistakes you can make is if you do this and think of it as one and done, then you're going to really struggle maintaining this compliance. So you're going to have to implement new processes in order to maintain all of these new compliance requirements that come with CMMC. Now, what is the biggest challenge you guys see implementing CMMC? Just shout it out. Where to get started, culture, what else? What do I need to do? What else? Oh, why do I need to do it? Oh, why, yes. What about cost? Is cost a big factor in it? One of the things when I thought about this was leadership and really looking at the different components of leadership in the organization. One of the challenges that I hear a lot of pushback is the cost. And I got to thinking about it. What if, and there was some money early on in some states to fund CMMC implementations, but that seems to be completely dried up now. But most MEPs, and TMAC is here. Is there a TMAC guy in the room? TMAC is out there. So most of the MEPs have funding available for high-tech organizations to get funding to do operational improvements, to implement automation and improve their efficiency. So what if you said, all right, we've got to implement all this technology. Let's leverage that to actually improve our process and our production line. Let's increase our capacity by 5 or 10%. Let's see if we can squeeze out 1 or 2 FTEs out of our production line. Now you take those increased capacity, which equates increased revenue. You pull out those couple of FTEs that you saved out of your production system. You apply those to IT, and now you have an ROI on CMMC that's net neutral, right? So looking at CMMC from a leadership perspective is going to be transformational. Matt talked about the changes in the market. Obviously, we're going to see market changes as they start applying these requirements to the contracts. And then we're going to see, obviously, it's a regulatory and a compliance thing. As we see this phased in, we're going to see it start impacting the market. And we're going to see some organizations are going to choose not to do this where other ones are. One of the interesting things, and you guys brought up culture over here, one of the most interesting things was to me was one of my clients said, what exactly is a mature cybersecurity culture? You know, it says, see, that's what CMMC stands for. And they're like, what does that really look like? So I tried to articulate that, and assuming that you're a typical manufacturing who has, a help desk type of a guy or gal that does desktop support, they may not have policies and procedures. They may not have checklists and consistency. They may not be doing the adequate monitoring. They might not have systems in place to do audits. They might not be being proactive about risk to the environment. So when you're looking at this, you really start from an ad hoc perspective where a lot of organizations are. They're just trying to keep the lights on, trying to keep everything running. A cyber mature culture really is an organization that's proactive, that's thinking about risk. Every time you make a purchase, you're considering the security risk of that system before you bring it into your environment. So that kind of helps with that. And so is that what we're moving to? Absolutely. And like I talked about, there's going to be some organizations that choose not to do this. So there is going to be some M&A activity in the marketplace. So when we look at all of these types of changes, you know, 8 or 9 of them are absolutely impacted by the CMMC project. So you're really looking at business transformation when you start and implement a CMMC project. So the Harvard Business Review reported 70% of change initiatives fail to accomplish their intended outcomes. Now, this was really shocking to me. I was really surprised by this number, that it was this high. So I asked myself 2 questions. I said, okay, first of all, what is the failure factors? And number 2, how do we mitigate that risk when it comes to CMMC? If those failure factors could apply to a CMMC project, what do we need to do to mitigate that risk? So first of all, they said there was lack of vision with urgency. They said there was lack of communication, did not have a strong implementation team. They had competing priorities. As you guys know, you kick off projects and then you get a new contract, you get all of these other competing priorities, and sometimes CMMC starts taking a back seat. And then there's obstacles. Obstacles can be any number of things. It could be technology debt, meaning you've got old legacy systems that are no longer supported. It could be staffing, it could be skills, it could be, it kind of covers the gamut there. So from a risk perspective, what can we do? Number 1, we're talking structural change to your organization. So we're going to want to provide a scaffolding for the leadership to lead this change. We're going to want to implement CMMC with a 12-step methodology. So we have a structure and we're going through it methodically and we're consistent as we do it. And for fun, we're going to talk about a timeline. If you have a timeline and a deadline and there's follow-up, you're going to have a lot more consistency on getting the team to really stay on track with it. So let's start with the leadership scaffolding. All right, the first risk was there was lack of vision with urgency. So as leaders, look at how you can create this future state vision and why you need to do it. Tie it to your current vision and goals. Look at what you can do to help motivate the team. But most importantly, you need to be prepared to paint a dire outcome. What pain are we going to feel? What's the impact on our organization if we do not do this? If Department of Defense contracts is more than 20% of your business and maybe the rest of it's commercial, 20%, you might be able to replace commercial business if you lose that Department of Defense revenue. If it's 50% or more, how hard is it going to be to replace that revenue? So you now have a dire outcome. When you start looking at that financial projection and what that impact is, now you have a compelling reason why you need to take on CMMC. Any questions on that? All right. Next, we're going to talk about change leadership. Change leadership is going to be what you can do to help support your team. Like I mentioned, the first thing you need to do is stand up a GRC committee. This is a group that's going to be the governing approval body and decision-making body for your CMMC project. And you're going to need to start looking at this leadership like you would a chess game. You need to be like 3 steps ahead of your team and thinking about what you need to do and how to support the team. One of the things that, as you go through this, is start having these communications. I know a lot of times there's been, some of the clients I've helped, they've really tried to push this off to IT. But what we found is that there are fundamental organizational decisions that have to be made. And if you don't have an executive that can authorize process changes, technology purchases, make decisions, a lot of times there's 2 ways, there's more than one way to do anything, but a lot of times there's an efficient way to do something that's going to cost more money. Or there's a cheaper way to do it, but it's going to take more time, be less efficient, and impact your staff. And so those are decisions that really need to be made. You can do it either way. Sometimes it's a hard cost versus a soft cost. But really building that trust with your team and starting to do that. When you look at innovation, what is the number one blocker to your team being able to be innovative? It's fear. If you are communicating with your team and alleviating that fear, you're going to have a much more productive team and you'd be able to address resistance in the organization. So we talked a little bit about communication. That was one of the top failure factors, having key messages and talking about it. One of the things, and I have been through lots of organization changes, one of the things I found was that if you don't explain the story and connect the dots and explain how this change is going to impact somebody's job, a lot of times, what do they think? The only story they know is, I'm going to lose my job. No matter what the change is, that's the fear is, I'm going to lose my job. So you have to communicate it time and time again, communicate how it's going to impact them and really be able to also listen to those concerns. If you listen to their concerns and they feel heard, it's a lot easier to adopt change, even if it's not the way that they recommend it. So building out a strong team. Who do you need to have on your core team? You can't have the whole organization on it unless you have a really small team. But you really are going to need your IT person. You're going to need someone from HR. You're going to need someone from your operations team that knows where the flow of data is, that knows how the production team uses information and what systems. You're going to have times where you're going to need to pull in somebody from facilities. You don't need them all of the time, but when you're doing physical environment, you're going to need them as an ad hoc member of the team. So building out that core team is going to be important. Be prepared to provide training to your team. Training them on the new processes is one thing, but there's nothing more terrifying than being given more responsibilities, but know you don't have the skills to do it. So you want to be able to make sure that you're supporting the team and making them successful in this new endeavor. Last, celebrate as you go along. As we look at the timeline a little bit later on, you're going to see you're in this for the long haul. So figure out how you can celebrate along the way and really look at recognition programs and recognizing contributions at all level. It really helps in understanding how people like to be recognized. I've had team members before that are mortified if you call them up to the front of the room and recognize them for, doing some significant thing. And I have had other team members that's what they crave. They really eat that up and it really motivates them. So you really kind of have to know what works for each one. All right, so this next phase is the 12-step implementation process for CMMC. When we look at this, the first 7 steps of this is discovery and scoping. And I can't emphasize how important this is. And even if we go through discovery and scoping, you're going to find as we move on into the implementation pieces of it, you may have more discovery as you go along. So don't think that you're ever thoroughly done with scoping until you're certified, because scope changes. As soon as you bring in a new system, your scope is changing. Steps 8 through 10 are an implementation methodology around the controls. And then affirmation and certification is step 11. And then step 12 is ongoing maintenance and continuous monitoring. And that's going to be an important part of this, is to be able to maintain this for 3 years, because this is not one and done. So let's start with discovering scoping. First of all, you have to really figure out how you're going to do the project. Are you going to try and do it in-house with your own team, or are you going to outsource it and get someone to consult with you? I highly encourage you get consultants off of the Cyber AB market. The technical certification compliance requirements under CMMC are very specific, and unless your MSP is trained on that, they may not be guiding you on the things that you need to do to get compliant. And then also too, if you're choosing any applications in the cloud, make sure that they're FedRAMP moderate if you have CUI. But what I would suggest is that most organizations are going to have a hybrid. You're going to have to do some of it in-house. There's no way, because of the changes and the the impact to your organization, that you can outsource this to anybody to do it for you and just bring you a package that's done. So there has to be a hybrid model, really. So we're going to talk about a few tools. If you are new to CMMC, how many of you guys are pretty new to CMMC versus you're halfway there? Mostly new, halfway there, in the midst of it, ready for audit. Okay, so we got a good mix across the room, about equal in there. All right, so yes. Yeah, I provided them. I assume that they're going to make the recording available, but if you email me, I can share the slides too. All right, so there's a few tools that you're going to need, and if you can get these tools in place before you start your project, you're going to hit the ground running. So first of all, there is tons of training. You have security awareness training for everyone in the organization, but then you also have to track training on all of the processes. So having some type of a tracker, and it could be done in a spreadsheet, but you just need a decision around what you're going to do. Next, you're going to need some inventory tools to monitor stuff on your network. You're going to need to determine what secure communications you're going to use. Are you going to go with Microsoft, or you're going to look at Prevail? And then your change control system. Everything that you do, every change that you implement needs to be documented through a change control. You need to show that you put the change request in, you need to review it and discuss it and approve it, and then you need to review it after it was implemented. So having that in place is important. And then you need a GRC compliance tracker. What I would suggest is that, how many of you guys in here have Future Feed already? Do a lot of you guys have Future Feed? What I would suggest is that I've seen some people trying to do this with a spreadsheet, and it just doesn't work. There is just no way you can do this successfully with a spreadsheet. Future Feed is a fantastic GRC tool because it was designed specifically for CMMC. I have looked at many other compliance trackers, and in my past, I've done other compliance programs with other trackers, but none of them have been designed around the complexity and the structure that CMMC requires in order to pass an audit. So there's a couple of things that they do really well that I like. As you're doing this and looking at it from a project management perspective, as you document your stuff in there, they dynamically build a PowerPoint presentation that's executive level and has detail in it that shows exactly where your project is. And there's no extra effort to do it. You push a button and say, give me a current one. I mean, literally in 2 seconds, you have an executive level PowerPoint. So you're not tracking the project over here in Smartsheets or some project manager and then turning around and trying to build a presentation for executives. So it does that. It also gives you a really good mechanism for building out your inventory and your current state and helping you with all of that. And that doesn't count all of the assessments. And we'll talk about that a little bit more in here in just a minute. All right, so step number 3 is finding, and I apologize, CFI is covered federal information, and CUI is controlled unclassified information. It used to be FCI, and I've been trying really hard in my lexicon to change that, and I'm going to say it wrong 3 times. But anyway, look at your contracts. Go back to your contracts. Figure out what you have as far as FCI or CUI. Look at how you're handling it internally. Do you pass it down to subs? Are they generating more CUI and passing it back to you? What are you doing with that information? Then how does it flow out? When you start documenting that, you've got to document those data flows, but you also need to document what people are touching this, who is authorized to access it, what places, and don't forget, we're doing digital and physical where this CUI and CFI are located, and then the technology. You've got to actually document every single system that this is in, devices, cloud apps, everything. And then what processes do you have in place that need that? So this is really going to determining what you currently have in your environment. So once you've done that, you're going to be able to identify, do I need to do CMMC level 1? If you only have CFI, then you only need to do the 15 basic controls. If you have CUI, then you need to do level 2, which is 110 controls. And then if you have CUI with highly sensitive data, you're going to be required to do level 3. And then there's some contracts that have specified security requirements, and so that's CUI specified, and then you have to do whatever those are. All right, step number 5 is the system security plan. The system security plan is the basis of your assessment. And it has basically 2 levels. First, you have all of your inventory and your organization level information, and then you're going to go into information around each one of the security controls. And you're going to get into conformity statements. We're going to talk about those in detail in just a moment. FutureFeed, also a little plug here for FutureFeed. They do a beautiful job of tracking this and helping you manage it. They give you a quick assessment tool to do it. They give you lots of ways to document where you're at and review where you're at. And they have a really nice tool for managing both organization level data plus control level data. And like I said, all of that feeds into the presentation portion of it. And it dynamically builds your SSP. So you're not wondering if you have the latest version of data or if you pulled it from the wrong folder. If you say FutureFeed is our source of truth and the latest version of everything goes in there and that's where you're maintaining it, then at any time you can pull your SSP and it's going to be accurate to exactly where you're at and you won't be fiddling around with different versions. Step number 6 is inventorying all of those assets. Now, in the CMMC Level 2 implementation guide, there is a list of asset categories that need to be applied to all of your technology. And so you're going to want to use that as you go through that. So now that you've done all of this assessment, do you guys see how much work it is to actually do the actual very first step, which is defining your scope? I mean, that's a lot right there. So you've defined your current scope, and you may find that as you do that you haven't applied all the security controls and you're storing CUI in places that are insecure. And so you're going to need to change your scope for your future state. And so these are going to be some really important decisions and discussions that have to happen because you're really going to want to make sure that your future state and your future scope is what's going to pass the audit. And so look at those scoping guides and that will really help you in that. Now, the next step we're going to talk about is, so that first step is just like step number 1, scoping. Next, we're going to talk about implementation, and this is where you're going to get into implementation for all of the, either the 15 basic controls for level 1 or the 110 security controls for level 2. So the first thing you want to do is do a real quick kind of a gap assessment and assess where you're at. When you're going through this very first pass, don't try and fix stuff, just gather what you have. If it's not met, it's not met. Just, our idea here is just figure out where we're at. If you have some evidence, we're going to start building that traceability matrix, and we're going to talk about that a little bit more. So now that you've created a plan of action milestone, so that first assessment, when you say not met, in FutureFeed, it automatically creates your plan of action milestone for you, or you can create it. But basically, this is the list of all the things that have to be done for completing your implementation. And so what do you need to close a POAM? Well, first of all, each of the security controls are going to need policies, processes. You're going to need procedures. You're going to need plans. You're going to need evidence. And so when you look at this, now we have to look at all of the different families. So in NIST 800-171, there are 14 families. Now, 3.1 is the first one. It's access control. A lot of people who started with 3.1. Yep. I'm here to tell all of you guys that haven't started, do that one last. You don't want to start with 3.1. They jammed a whole bunch of stuff in there. It's complex, it's ugly. Don't start with 3.1. But what the assessment that we just did is really 3.12. So we've already got a good start here. But let's start with the easy things. Let's do physical and environmental controls. Let's do security awareness training. Let's start with personnel. Let's just start with some basic things because that's going to get us going on the methodology and doing things that aren't highly technical. So that's going to take those first 4 families. Next, let's look at the basics. Most of these you have to do for level 1 or level 2, but you have media protection, you have system communication, which is a fancy word for your firewall and secure communications. Information integrity is your antivirus, and then you're going to implement patching and maintenance. So now we're starting to cover the basics. Now you're going to start getting into the advanced ones, where you're going to get into configuration management. You're going to get into incident response. And then the last two you're going to do is identification and authentication with access control, because those are married together. And so start doing those advanced ones. And then the last two is audit accountability and risk assessment. If you work your project in that order, it becomes very logical, but don't do them, and don't start with 3.1. All right, so now we've kind of talked about this. We've talked about kind of an approach and an order. So when you are closing a POAM, what does it take? What do you need? So we're going to real quickly just talk about one. This is actually one of the most highly misunderstood security controls. It's not technical in any manner. 3.1.22 is basically controlling. They want to control that you don't post FCI or CUI, CFI or CUI, on any publicly accessible system, meaning your public-facing web page, social media, anything like that, or portals if you have sales portals or things like that. So now we have to actually dig down one layer deeper. You're going to go to 800.171 alpha, where it's going to list the objectives. Each one of the security controls has objectives that the assessors are going to be assessing you against. So these 5 objectives say basically, who's authorized to post? Do you have a procedure? What's the process to review every posting before it gets posted? Do you review your public websites? And then do you have a process to remove anything that you shouldn't have? So in a nutshell, that one control is really asking those 5 things. So now for each one of those objectives, you have to write a conformity statement. Stay with me, I promise. I'm not going to go any deeper than this. But I need to break it down to this level so you can understand how the whole approach ties together. So one conformity statement has 5 parts. For each one of the objectives, you have to answer these 5 questions, and you have to write it out. So first of all, they want to know, what was your secure design? How did you plan to meet that? Let's say we take the objective of review every posting before it gets posted to the public website. We're just going to talk about that one objective. So first of all, you have to have a secure design. So you got to have a process. You got to have a policy governing that process. You have to describe what you implemented. Then you have to ensure that you're doing it in an ongoing way. So what process and what evidence do you have that you're doing that? And then what evidence can you produce that you did it and that you're continuing to do it? And then that all has to have dated and authorization by the executive over the project, likely your CEO. So you can see the level of detail and why you don't want to track this much detail in a spreadsheet. This is just ugly. But FutureFeed has built this so you can document this at the objective level within the access control system within their platform. So if you think about the 320 objectives and these 5 statements you have to develop for each one, this is how you need to build out your project. This builds the traceability matrix that the assessors, those C3PAOs, are going to use this traceability matrix to figure out what they're going to be looking for. What policy do they need to pull and look at? What evidence do they need to review to ensure you're doing what was designed? Any questions on this? Okay. Now we understand what we got to do. How are we actually going to do it? So first of all, we're going to pick public posting as a control. We're going to plan. So the first thing we're going to do is we got to plan what we're going to do, and we got to write a policy. So that's the first thing your team is going to do, is figure out, how are we going to review, who's going to be authorized, how are we going to document this, where are we going to store the evidence for posting this content. So you got to plan it, and you got to write a policy governing it. Then you're going to implement the technology. Well, we're not implementing a new firewall, but we would recommend documenting what your current, not a new firewall, we're not implementing a new website, but you should document that, right? If someone's hosting it, where are they hosting it, things like that. But we are going to implement a process for reviewing all of those postings before they get posted. And then we're also going to implement a process for reviewing those platforms on a regular basis, and that becomes part of it. So then the last two steps is proving it. All right, we got to have ongoing monitoring. We got to review those websites. We got to document. We got to, document somewhere that we reviewed them. Then you got to have an audit that shows you went back and looked at those reviews were happening. Then you got to take all that evidence, load it into FutureFeed, and then I highly recommend you do a mock audit. You take the time at that point, walk through that traceability matrix, finalize that conformity statement, and then do a mock audit with your team so they understand when the assessors come how to have that conversation. So step number 10 is validation. If you are in the camp where you're doing it yourself, I highly recommend at this point, you bring in a third-party CCP or even a C3PAO to do this validation step before you do an audit, because sometimes you just don't know what you don't know. But if you've had a consultant all along, then go back through every single control, every single objective, and verify that you have all your I's crossed and your T's dotted. All right, now we're going to talk about affirmations and certifications. There are two components to this. If you are doing a affirmation statement, level 1 is only required to do an affirmation statement, and this is kind of new in the last round of updates. Now, who can do this? The affirming official in the regulations, and you can see the CFR Title 32 reference up there, defines that the affirming official has to be a senior level person. It has to be responsible for the compliance program, and they have to have the authority to commit the organization to ongoing compliance. Can somebody from IT be this person? No. If you're the CEO, how are you going to feel comfortable writing this statement if you're not involved with the project at every step of the way? Understanding the processes and things that have been put in place, you wouldn't feel comfortable being able to write an affirmation statement that says, we've implemented it, we will maintain it, we've applied all of it to everything applicable within our organization, and we meet all of the requirements. So as a executive on this, it's really important that you're part of that GRC committee and you're involved in this project every step of the way. So at the end, you're comfortable and confident when you write this affirmation statement. Now, the next one is certify. So there's going to be a lot more conversations in this session about it, so I'm not going to go into a lot of it. But obviously, as Matt said, there's been a round of C3POs that have been authorized. You're going to want to check and make sure they're listed on the CyberAB website, and you're going to want to check and see where their renewal dates are. You don't want to get somebody that their renewal date comes up in the middle of your engagement. They'll do a pre-assessment, they're going to review your documentation, then they're going to have a site visit, and then if there's any gaps, you've got 180 days to remediate those 1-pointers. Instant death, if you miss a 3-pointer or a 5-pointer. And then they load your certification up into the SBRS database. And so even if you have to have a level 2 C3PO certification for years 2 and 3, you have to do an affirmation statement. So the affirmation statement actually still applies to everyone. All right, step number 12. This is ongoing. You got to do it for 3 more years. You got to do your audits, monitoring, annual affirmations. As you have changes in your organization and you're bringing in new technology, that could impact your scope. And so you're going to want to make sure that you're maintaining this going forward. All right, and FutureFeed is actually a really good tool for that. One thing that they've just implemented a new round of enhancements to it, which includes scheduling recurring tasks out there. You can assign them to individuals or to a team, and it will send reminders out, and then it gives you a place where they can go in and load the evidence that they did it and sign off that they did it, which is huge as far as being able to maintain compliance going forward. And I just want to say, I've only barely touched on FutureFeed. If you want a demo, Chase is in the back of the room back there. All right, so we have just a couple more minutes. Oh, actually, we got 10 more minutes. Okay, we're doing really good, you guys. All right, so I'm going to say that these timelines have a whole lot of assumptions baked into them, and they're just generic, but they really are designed for if you're new to CMMC and you haven't started and you're trying to do level 1, realistically, you could get level 1 done maybe within a month or 2. If all of the stars aligned, you had all of the right team, you had some stuff ready to go. But realistically, even if you have a firewall and you have antivirus and you have all the things, going through the processes and really going through the documentation that's required, writing those policies, developing procedures, developing processes, training your staff on this, and developing checklists, all of this stuff takes time. And if you have a team that's meeting once a week for an hour or 2 and maybe working offline on it for an hour or 2, even to do level 1 realistically for a small organization, you could be looking at a 6-month project. So you start out with scoping in phase 1, and then you would go into those implementations to get to your affirmation statement, and then you would have GRC committee meeting throughout to do your audits and oversight and authorizations. Level 2, we measure that in quarters, not months. So in level 2, same thing. Quarter 1, you're going to be doing your scoping. You're going to begin some of those easy assessments and controls, and then move into the basics, and then move into advanced. So you could easily be talking about if you were a small organization, you only had 1 location, and you had a dedicated team, you could probably do a level 2 in 6 months if you had it as a priority and you had no competing things and you could really seriously work on it. But for most organizations, real life happens, competing priorities happen, you end up having some technology debt. That means you have a 2012 server. That means you have desktops that are no longer supported and you've got to replace them. There's a lot of technology debt that we find in organizations that will not meet the security requirements. We found some that have an ERP, their enterprise resource planning system, where they do all of their purchasing and production, is not FedRAMP moderate. So now if you're talking about having to actually change out your ERP in order to be CMMC compliant, you could be talking about a year-long project right there. If you have CUI in that system, right? You might have to change your processes and pull CUI out of it so you don't have to go down that path. But those are the type of discussions and decisions that you have to make. And then as you go on, you're going to have your GRC going throughout, and then any POAMs once you have your audit. So that pretty much wraps up kind of just like a high level kind of like I said, there's a whole lot of assumptions in there. But I did want to leave you with a final thought. But before we get to that, let's open it up for questions for a few minutes. We have a question right there.
Yeah, I just have a clarification question. You mentioned the affirmation that needs to be done annually. Mm-hmm. Is it self-assessment or
yes,
the one that you put into SAM.gov?
Yes.
Okay, good. Thank you.
It's for level 1, it's self-assessment. There are a few number of level 2s that will be self-assessment, like they said, maybe like 10%, and Travis kind of hinted at it. Mm-hmm. Those are self-assessments, and you would do a self-affirmation on those. Mm-hmm. And with the self-affirmation, you still have the same 100, and if you do a self-affirmation and find you have a gap, you still have 180 days to remediate that. So they treat it as real similar to a C3PAO.
But the gap needs to be smaller, not bigger. I assume there is like certain cap.
You still have to complete all of those in a self-affirmation. You still have to close all the gaps within 180 days. Right?
Okay.
Question?
Just to get some clarification, you mentioned about instant death if you miss 3 pointers or 5 pointers.
Yeah.
What I read, and just correct me if I'm wrong, you can score 80% of the control, pass 80% of the controls to get a conditional, mm-hmm. and then you have 180 days to
do that. Correct.
So just making sure that that's the correct, right? Not a sudden death if you miss 3 pointers.
Did they change that, Reagan? Did they change that? that if you miss a 5-point or 3-point in your C3PAO assessment, that it's instant death?
88.
80, yeah, 88 and only 1-pointers. And only 1-pointers.
That's right. But the challenge is that. Challenge is that, get this mic right. There are prohibited poem items. So there are those items on the poem which you cannot have there, prohibit you from actually affirming or moving towards certification as well.
And those are level 1s, yeah. They won't even start a third-party assessment if you haven't completed all the level 1 controls. Other questions? Oh, did you have another question?
Yeah, I just wanted to get a clarification on the FCI and CFI. Is that your term? Because there's no mention of CFI anywhere in any of the documentation I have read.
So it just changed in the CFR that was published January 6th, I believe.
Okay, that's
Yeah.
why it's not
And they changed it to align with controlled unclassified information, and they changed that naming to be covered federal information, but it's still referring to the same data as FCI, which was federal contract information. The other change that they made in that was that prior, you had the body of FCI, and CUI was a little subset within that. With the January publication, they bifurcated that. So now you have CFI, covered federal information, over here, separate, and you have CUI over here, and they bifurcated that.
Thank you.
Oh, there's a question behind you.
Yeah, thanks. So we recently had a DIBCAC assessment, and so I'm trying to understand, or maybe you could help clarify how that'll play out in the future with these assessments and the levels and frequency. It's a little ambiguous at the moment.
So you just had a DIBCAC assessment? Okay, so, and your question is what do you need to do going forward?
Well, so there's a lot of the same requirements that are covered there, and then as you're going for, say, level 2 or level 3, is there any qualifications that you can get credit for those assessments in terms of the CMMC assessment as well? Is there any overlap, or are the compliances coming together in any sense?
So one thing that they did stipulate that is for a level 3, if you have to do a level 3, you have to have a level 2 before you can do a level 3. As far as a DIBCAC, I have not heard what that.
Yeah, what was the DIBCAC assessment, a JSVA? Or was it,
Just a
or
full assessment? Yeah.
I'm sorry?
A full assessment for.
Full assessment,
yeah.
so DIBCAC highs.
Yes,
And it was underneath the JVSA program?
correct.
Okay, so that should give you,
I thought
that should transfer over.
Yeah.
Now, who was the C3PO that assisted that?
No, this was not, this was the
Uh,
DIBCAC assessors on site, so.
Oh,
we did,
okay,
yeah,
all right, so
Them directly.
that, if the DIBCAC high was ordered for whatever circumstances or just randomly selected, right? Then that's not going to be underneath the Joint Voluntary Surveillance Program. So the intent of that is that that is sort of a break-in period for the C3POs, and that provides a transition from the DIBCAC team conducting a DIBCAC high, not the CMC standard, with the C3PO, and then the outsource of that is that you would meet the standards and criteria to be certified. But a DIBCAC high assessment alone does not qualify for that.
So that doesn't.
But it would mean, depending on your score, mean that you may be ready, right? So,
Yeah, no, it's a good indicator for us to be
Yeah.
prepared, but now we've got the additional controls, so.
yeah, there's some subtle nuances underneath the new rule that you're
Yeah.
going to want to make sure that you do.
Yeah, there were some changes. Okay, we have a question back
One more
there, and then I
question.
thought we had one over here too.
So in regards to the 10% that you mentioned, that level 2 that will continue with the self-attestation, is that a temporary thing? Or will there be more additional details that will come when Title 48 is published?
It'll be, I believe it's going to be on a contract basis, and it was an estimation in the in the CFR of just an estimate of, they anticipated these number of contracts would allow a self-affirmation on level 2. And it's going to be on a contract basis. It's not.
Understood. And would the COR then kind of place that in the contract or?
Yep,
Okay,
it'll be, yeah, exactly. It'll-
okay.
Mhm.
Thank you.
All right, we have one more question.
One
here.
last one. In terms of scoping moving forward, the way an organization might decide if they need to be compliant or not is to look at their contracts, see if 7012 is there, and then do their assessment and see, do we actually have any CUI that we're receiving as part of our contract, assuming we're talking maybe about a second tier supplier.
Correct.
Moving forward under the new contract clauses that are coming out, will it be the case that a contract will be designated as requiring a level 2 certification, and then any organization working under that contract, whether they're receiving CUI or not, would still be required to get level 2 certification?
All right, so you bring up an interesting question. One of the clauses in the CFR stated that if you are level 3 and you have a sub, that sub must be level 2 no matter what you flow down to them. But it did not specify that on a level 2 contract. It did not specify that a sub had to be level 2 also. So if you had a sub that, let's say you're making airplane parts and you're buying rivets that are commercial off the shelf, in your contract, you have a 7012 clause that says you have to be level 2 and you have to have a C3PO assessment, okay? You can still have a sub that's supplying you commercial COTS off the shelf rivets for your airplane wings that do not have to be certified level 2.
Sure. With the COTS exception, what about something that maybe doesn't have, and the COTS exception, even though that program is complicated, it's a binary yes, no, you are, you aren't.
Yeah. So are you saying if you're flowing down technical information to a sub, do they have to be certified? If it's CUI, absolutely yes. You are prohibited from flowing down CUI to a sub unless they are certified.
Even though the contract says you have to be level 2 certified, my sub doesn't necessarily have to be if they're not receiving CUI.
That's correct. Yeah, yeah,
Fantastic.
yeah. Yes, level 1, but they don't have to have a level 2. Okay. All right. That was a great question though, because flow down is very complex. Absolutely. So I'm going to wrap this up with a final parting thought. Achieving CMMC compliance is not just a technical task. Granted, a third of it is technical, but most of it is administrative. It's an organizational change initiative that is transformational. It requires vision and it requires change leadership. It requires structural changes within your organization, and you need to have a structured implementation process in order to go about this methodically, in order to be successful. Choosing the right tools as you go along is going to help your process and your project be more seamless and be more successful. And the whole goal here is to help you succeed at maintaining your competitive edge in the defense supply chain and protecting us against those cyber threats. Thank you very much, you guys. Appreciate your time today.
Awesome. Thank you, Nancy. And I wanted to be the one to thank Nancy because I don't know if you people realize, but just to go back to your original question, how many of you are just getting started or are midway through the process? Okay, if this applies to you, you need to go back and re-listen to this session, because everything that Nancy hit on is going to be imperative to what you're doing. And I'm sorry, my name is Xavier Lemond. I'm the Director of Professional Services and Product Development at DTC Global. So everything that she has just talked about, I had on my to-do list. You just saved me 40 hours worth of work. So, okay, what she's talking about is absolutely true.
Did I miss
Okay.
anything?
Yeah, the whole thing in terms of what the steps are, because I was planning on doing the same thing. What are the steps that we need to outline? This is what you need to do. This is what you need to know. So, I mean, again, go back, review the session, know exactly what's coming, what you need to do, everything that you're going to have to address. In fact, the only thing that was different from you, we had just a couple of terms that were different, but we're talking about the same thing. So what she's telling you is absolutely where you're headed and what you need to do. And every point that she made, you're going to find out, okay, that this is something you're going to have to deal with. So again, thank you. Thank you for saving me so much work. And I think I'll turn it over to Reagan now.
Thank you.
Our chair.